Okay, so now we are going to discuss the difference between Spring and Spring Boot. Now you may heard me several times that I've used the word Spring or Spring Boot. Now in this course we will use the words Spring and Spring Boot interchangeably, and it basically means the same in this course. Now in reality it's not the same, because in this course what we are learning Spring Boot, because this is an industry standard, and all of your projects and in the future when you use Spring, everyone, I mean not everyone, you will use Spring Boot application, and you will see right now why you will use Spring Boot application and not just plain Spring. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to create this project with plain Spring, without the Spring Boot, and you will see the difference between it. So I'm going to go here, File, New, and just from the beginning you don't need to code this with me, but if you want, it's fine. It's just an example to show you the difference between these two Spring and Spring Boot. So new project, I'm going to go to new Gradle. Next I'm going to put like plain Spring app, finish, new window, and as you see here it has created a Gradle project. Now don't worry, you don't know right now what Gradle is, but for now just stay with me. So what we need to do right now is to add the Spring library into our project. So I'm going to go right here and type Spring context Maven. Now I repeat, don't worry if you don't understand this. I'm going to take this one, I'm going to take this Gradle short, I'm just going to copy it, I'm going to paste it here. Then you also need to add the Spring core. So let me just find Spring core, the same version, 5.3.24. I'm going to copy this here. Okay, then I'm going to refresh this. Okay, now I'm going to create let me go here, com example. So I'm going to create the same name, new com example my Spring app, like this. Now I'm going to add this component scan, because this component scan has been added for me with this two dependency which I added. Now don't worry if you don't understand. Configuration, and then I'm going to go here and I'm just going to copy. Let me just copy everything from this, paste it here. Let me just copy also the controller, paste it here. Now I need to fix the imports. So let me go to person. Okay, everything is good. Let me go to person DAO, import class. Okay, let me go to person service. I also need to import here. Let me go to another person service here. Let me go here, import. Okay. Okay. Now, as you see here, I have some errors about this SL4J logger. Why is that? Because I don't have this library. I need to explicitly add this library into my project. So what I need to do is go here, SL4J. This one, I'm going to take this one. Let me take this one. So I need to copy this, go to my Gradle, then refresh this. And now it has been added into my class path, into my external libraries. This is an external library which has been added here. You see here. Okay, let me go here, so no more error. Okay, I have this error. Okay. Maybe I have an error in my interface, yes. Like this, my Spring app. So I'm going to need to add a main method. Now let me go here. So let me just copy this private final. Okay. Let me add person controller with auto wired, and here I need to explicitly configure my application context like this. So I am creating an annotation configuration application context based on this class and based on the configuration and component scan. If you remember, component scan will scan all the packages from which my class is and all the sub packages, so everything from here. Okay, and now let me just copy this logger. Okay, so I need to use a static logger, my Spring App class. Okay, and here I need to use the person controller. Okay, because this one is a static, so I can just, okay, I can use this in my constructor because this is a static method and this is not a static object. Okay, so this is all. Now let me just start and see if I have some errors. And you can see here I have some errors. No qualifying type for logger, because this is my error in my configuration in controller here. In controller, because I forgot to add the my config package. So now let me start it again. And you can see I have failed to load class this SL4J static logger binder. So now what's my next step? I will try to Google this and see why the error happens. And let me just copy this. And let me go here. Let me go here. And as you see, I need to add some extra dependencies in order for my project to work. So I need to add SL4J API and also build Gradle. This one, now let me just delete these comments, and also SL4J simple. Simple here. Now I repeat, don't worry if you don't understand what I am doing right now. I'm just trying to show you the difference between Spring and Spring Boot. Now I will refresh this. Let me start it again. I will also have an error. Okay, I don't have an error. As you see here, I have the beans which have been added. It have been added, and it has been is logging for me on the screen. Now it's a different type of output, but don't worry about this. And as you see, what I have done right now, I basically done the same thing which we have done right here. The only difference is here I'm using plain Spring, so not Spring Boot. So what Spring Boot does behind the scenes? So let me just go to Google and type Spring Boot docs, and we can see here what Spring Boot is. So what is Spring Boot? Okay, Spring Boot. You see, Spring Boot this is from the Spring documentation. Spring Boot make it easy to create standalone production grid that you can just run. We take an opinionated view and third-party hardware so you can get started with minimum fuss. Most Spring Boot applications need minimal Spring configuration. So what basically Spring Boot does behind the scenes, what has happened over the years is, in order for you to use Spring, as you saw here, plain Spring, okay, not this one, as you see, I need to do some extra configuration just so I can start my simple app. So I need to add all these dependencies, I need to have all this configuration that I have done here, and trust me, this is a very simple app. Imagine when we add the web module, the database module, and all these other modules which we have discussed about, and we will learn about it, you will need to do extra configuration. Now, in comparison with the old, without Spring, this is a very minimal configuration, but it still is. It's a boilerplate code which I need to add every time. So Spring has created this Spring Boot, which basically Spring Boot has this option or this feature of auto configuration. And now if we go to my Spring Boot application, we see here that we have this annotation enable auto configuration. So basically what Spring Boot does behind the scenes, when we start the application, now this is in my project, you see that it does all this configuration for me. So I won't do all this manual configuration. You see auto configuration matched and so on. Now I'm not using all these classes, but in a real application you will use many classes which we have added here. So basically Spring Boot is basically Spring plus extra features, and the main feature is the fact that it has this auto configuration. Now if I go to my Buildgrader file in my Spring Boot application, you see here that I don't have all this implementation which I have added here, because here you see only one, the Spring Boot starter. So this Spring Boot starter, by default, this is being added when we created our Spring application in the Spring initializer, if we remember at the very beginning. So when you create this, it adds the Spring, by default it adds the Spring Boot starter for you. And if I go here to this Gradle here, and this is my first Spring app dependencies, I go to runtime, you see that I have this Spring Boot starter, and by default Spring Boot has added for me a lot of libraries. You see it has added the Spring Context library, the Spring Core library, which we manually insert here. It has added for me the Spring Boot starter logging, and if you see here, it has added the SL4J logging for me, which we have manually added here. And if we go here, you know, the API which I have added here, and basically this Apache logging and other libraries for logging. And if you see here, Spring is doing all of this behind the scenes and is giving you a minimum configuration, so you won't have to do this, as it says in the documentation, to just run. And trust me, this is only plain Spring application. If you see here, we have these dependencies, and you can add a lot of dependencies. You can have the web services dependency, you can add, I don't know, configuration processor, and all of these dependencies is basically, it comes with a Spring Boot starter module, and it adds the minimum configuration for you to start. And in this course, what we will learn the Spring Boot, not Spring, because it's pointless, you know, to do all of this configuration by hand when we have Spring Boot. So what I'm trying to say in conclusion, maybe it's a long video, but I just want for you to understand the difference between Spring and Spring Boot. Spring Boot is Spring plus the auto configuration feature, and it gives you a minimum configuration so you can just run your application. Now I haven't discussed about this puppy right here, this application properties, because Spring Boot behind the scenes is loading all the configuration which you explicitly tell here. If you want to do this in a plain Spring app, you need to manually do something like property source, and you need to manually declare where is your application properties file. I mean, it's not for every thing that Spring Boot offers you, you need to do extra configuration on a plain Spring app. So you don't need to code this, but if you code this, it's fine. But from now on, when we use Spring and Spring Boot, I mean the same. We are just going to learn Spring Boot. We are going to learn different modules in Spring Boot. We're going to learn the web module, the security module, the database module, and so on. So that's all.